While it's important to mark the anniversary of the Arab Spring, 17th of December, when Mohammed Bouazizi burnt himself in the Tunisian city of Sidi Bouzid, sparking a series of events that resulted in the downfall of once seemingly invincible authoritarian regimes and upending the entire political and social landscape in the entire region, I think it's also important not to rush to conclusions over to what extent the Arab Spring has succeeded or to what extent it has failed. And the reasons are simple. Despite the fact that it's been 10 years since the spark of the Arab Spring, we see mass protests today in Iraq, we see mass protests today in Lebanon, we saw recently the downfall of the Bouteflika regime in Algeria as a result of mass protests, and we saw mass protests in Sudan contribute to the downfall of the regime of Omar al-Bashir. In other words, we are continuing to see the manifestation of a popular desire for self-determination and the popular rejection of authoritarianism. Moreover, even when we look at the countries embroiled in civil war, such as Libya, Yemen and Syria, the reality is that while the democratic transition has turned ugly, the reality is that authoritarian regimes have failed to reassert themselves against this popular desire for self-determination and freedom. And even in Egypt, where the democratic transition was overthrown by a military coup, the sensitivity of the army to all forms of protest suggests that the army is not yet assured that the flames of the Arab Spring have been doused or that they have disappeared, and that there is still a concerted repressive effort in order to prevent any manifestation that might lead to a renewal of the Arab Spring. It's also important to highlight that the Arab Spring should not be analysed in the context of the last 10 years, but in the context of the last 60 or 70 years. 70 years ago, this was a region that was under official colonisation, and then it entered into a period of de facto colonisation whereby the economies were dominated by former colonial powers that helped to preserve authoritarianism in order to preserve the system whereby its interests were protected. The Arab Spring is merely the latest in a series of chapters in which the people of the region are asserting their desire for complete freedom and complete independence. I think the most important dynamic in the Arab Spring has nothing to do with its trajectory, but everything to do with the attitudes of the international community that hesitated in the face of the Arab electorate's Islamic tendencies, described by French President Macron as a sign of regression. And it is this that has the gravest implications over the future of the Arab Spring, that international support for democratic transitions are contingent upon the Arab electorate making the right choices.